Kilmar Abrego Garcia, remember that name? The Maryland father who turned out to be a deported illegal alien with alleged MS-13 ties. He was avowedly at the center of Democrat Senator Chris Van Hollen's taxpayer-funded April trip to El Salvador. Judicial Watch says Van Hollen's visit amounted to giving aid and comfort to Garcia and has now filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the State Department demanding records on the Democrat senator's trip. Some may recall this was a trip Van Hollen bragged about very wildly and loudly on social media.
I just landed at the airport in San Salvador a little while ago. I'm now en route into the city, looking forward to meeting with the team from the American Embassy. And I do want to thank our Foreign Service officers and the whole team. After that, I hope to meet with some high-level government officials from El Salvador. As I've said before, the goal of my visit is to talk to people here about the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I told his wife and his family I would do everything possible to bring him home, and we're going to keep working at this until we're successful. I also hope to have the chance to meet with him, but we'll have a better idea if that works out a little later on.
Of course, you remember the photo shoot that happened afterwards. He was sitting by a pool with drinks, and it was a whole thing. Judicial Watch sought any and all records of Van Hollen's El Salvador travel, including agendas and communications dating from March 1st of this year. But the State Department closed the FOIA request within minutes of receiving it, without explanation or appeal rights. The watchdog group argues this violates FOIA law, which requires timely and transparent responses. The suit, Judicial Watch Incorporated versus U.S. Department of State, presses for disclosure. You may recall, just contrasting all of this, look at how much care and effort Democrats placed when Americans, say North Carolina, suffered this massive hurricane. And I don't remember Democrats, no less senators, leaping through hoops and bounds to go help North Carolina homeowners. In fact, it seemed like it was the opposite case. You may recall FEMA officials being advised against helping North Carolina homeowners with Trump signs after natural disasters. Just put those cases side by side. Both cases show a very selective transparency and political bias that is taking place all at the taxpayer expense. And I guarantee you, no matter what the number comes out with this lawsuit between Judicial Watch and the State Department, it's going to come out that the Democrats spent more on alleged MS-13 gang members than they ever did with anyone who needed help in the United States, such as those who live in North Carolina. Joining us now, former Green Beret and North Carolina Congressman Pat Harrigan joins us to discuss. Congressman, thank you for joining us. What do you make of the State Department refusing to release records on Senator Van Hollen's trip here?
Well, Chanel, it's always great to be with you. Thanks for having me back on. And I'm glad that you're shining a spotlight on this. We know that this was a little dated, but it's not, because it's highlighting something that's incredibly important for the American people to understand, which is the contrast between what the Democratic Party is doing for someone who's not a citizen. He's an illegal alien. He's an MS-13 gang member. And oh, by the way, he's a wife beater. And versus what the Democrats did when Hurricane Helene hit Western North Carolina almost a year ago, which is barely lift a finger to help those in Western North Carolina. I think it's absolutely beyond the pale, and I think Judicial Watch is exactly right to dig into this and demand some transparency and some answers.
Now, you're in Congress. You've taken trips overseas with other Congress members. I guess those are called CODELs, right? I mean, when Senator Van Hollen took this trip, it was taxpayer funded.
That is correct. It was absolutely taxpayer funded. And the difference between a trip that I would take on the Armed Services Committee, which might be looking at some of the strategic investments that we're making to either further partner with our allies in Europe or counter China in the Indo-Pacific, this was clearly not in the strategic interests of the United States of America or American citizens. This was only in the interest of an illegal alien gang member that for whatever reason, the Democrats decided they wanted to play political football with and prioritize that non-citizens' experience over what we ought to be doing on behalf of the American people, which is being responsible with their tax dollars and deploying those tax dollars in a way that genuinely serves the American interest.
I failed to be able to quickly come up with an analogy here, but if you were to take interest, for example, in, say, a North Carolina voter, a constituent who was being held illegally in another country, if you wanted to get up and go take a trip, I mean, would it look kind of like this, where you're using funds to go and do this? Like, how many trips are you allowed as a lawmaker? How much flexibility, shall we say, are you allowed to make kind of a single trip like this?
It kind of depends. If it's in a bipartisan nature, we have the ability to do effectively unlimited, as long as leadership within the House deems that it is within the national interest for it to occur. If we want to pursue something like an individual trip like this, like the senator did, we have to pay for that out of what's called our members' representational allowance. That's a fixed amount of money that we get every year to serve our constituency. Very clearly, Abrego Garcia is not his constituent. No matter what way you look at it, it is incredibly difficult to see how this ties into the national interest, and Judicial Watch needs these answers.
So then the next question becomes, it seems like political stunts like this would be far less prevalent if it was a lot more transparent. Why would the State Department want to hide something like this? Are they trying to hide sensitive information? Why can't the American people see the receipts for a trip that we paid for?
They should be able to see those receipts. And quite frankly, I think that if they do, I think we're going to have an ethical issue here, because very clearly the senator was pursuing a political agenda and not something that was in the national interest. And what should come out of this, in my opinion, is that the senator should have to pay for this trip out of his own pocket. That's not the American people's responsibility to pay for what he did.
I was just stunned to see how quickly, at least Judicial Watch said, that the State Department turned down this request. And I know they file FOIA requests night and day. That's what they do at Judicial Watch. So the fact that they received such a swift response clearly seems like there are still people on the inside who are trying to keep information like this behind scenes. Is there anything that you in Congress can do to help open up the transparency into things like this?
I think just continue to support Judicial Watch and understand that from our messaging perspective, we need to continue to push for more transparency in government, not less. That is the very lowest bar that we owe the American people. And I think that when you get into a situation like this, it seems like the rules are always kind of getting bent, if not very clearly broken, and that reduces trust and confidence in government. We've got to restore that by being more open, by being more forthright with the American people, and that's all Judicial Watch is asking from the government at this point in time, and I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, agreed. Before I let you go, Congressman, I wanted your take real quick, because you're pretty up to speed on a lot of this foreign policy stuff. Talk to us about what you thought was the best outcome out of the meeting between President Trump and the EU leaders who visited him this week, and Zelensky, who visited him this week. Great words coming out of them. Do you believe it?
I'm very hopeful, but hope's not a plan, Chanel, right? We've got to see concrete action being taken. And one of the things that I highlighted this week that's kind of inconsistent with the EU's messaging is that they're trying to be incredibly supportive of Ukraine. They're encouraging the United States, demanding the United States be even more supportive than we already have been, hundreds of billions of dollars. Yet the EU gave Russia $29 billion for energy last year when they only gave Ukraine $17 billion worth of aid for their military operations ongoing in their country. The EU has got to stop playing both sides, and they certainly should not be patronizing the United States of America and President Donald Trump for the efforts that we have gone to incredible lengths to try to end this conflict on their behalf.
Such a great point. And I think that also ties in with a lot of what's going on with India and, you know, how Russia is able to bypass all of these sanctions using India. We were just talking about that earlier in the show. Great point. Congressman, thank you very much for making the time. We appreciate it, as always.
Thanks for having me, Chanel.
Coming up, economist Darren Nelson on why gold protects against inflation and still shines during long-term boom-bust cycles. We'll be right back.